Hello and welcome. I'm Shelley Lang with the Fulton County Department of Public Works, and one of our missions here at Public Works is to raise awareness about good environmental stewardship. And we do that in many ways. We use many tools, but today we're going to talk about the watershed and water pollution. Now, this is one of my favorite tools to talk about how to keep water clean and how our land use contributes to water pollution. It's called an Enviroscape, and all it is a model or an example of a typical community within a watershed area. So the first question is, what is a watershed? A watershed is just a natural system, and it involves water and land and the community and the people that live in the community. And put simply, it's water that flows across a common piece of land and drains to a common area. And its highest points are usually mountains or peaks. The water will flow down into a common area. And in this particular instance, with this environment, we're going to call our common area our actual water source, which is right here, and it's the Chattahoochee River. Now, Georgia has a lot of watersheds, but it has 52 main large watersheds. The Chattahoochee River is actually a watershed. It's called the Chattahoochee Watershed, and it's one of the longest in Georgia, and it's fed through different streams. You can see here, we'll look at this more closely. Those creeks and those streams are all over the place. There's hundreds of them all throughout Georgia. And once again, they feed to a common area. In our case, it's the Chattahoochee River, which is our actual water supply source. So as we take a tour through our watershed, I want you to remember three very important things. First, I want you to remember that there are two types of pollution. The first one is called point source pollution, and that's pollution that you can actually point to the person or entity that is creating the pollution. The next one is non-point source pollution, and that's where you know you've got some pollution. You actually know what it is half of the time, but you can't point directly to where that pollution came from. The next thing that I want you to remember, the second thing, is that no matter where you are on the earth, you're always in a watershed. So there are maybe thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of watersheds all over the world. But no matter where you're standing, whether it be in London or Cairo, you're in a watershed. And the third thing I wanted you to remember as we go through our tour is that how we use our land either contributes or does not contribute to the water pollution within our land use. So right now we're going to take just a few minutes to take a quick tour of our watershed, and then we're going to come back. And the camera is going to be directly on the watershed because I want you to see the whole area, what the watershed consists of, and how it gets polluted. But we're going to start with our agricultural area. This is farming, agricultural. Then we have our recreational area. This happens to be, we're going to pretend that this is the Chattahoochee River, because the Chattahoochee River is a great recreation area. So not only is it our water source, but it's a recreation area. Then we have the part of our watershed in our community, which is roads, and those are getting a little wild there. Our roads. Then we have a storm drain. A storm drain is a drain, usually in the curb, that collects rainwater and it keeps our houses from flooding. Then we have a residential area with our houses, our cars, our animals. Then we have a logging area, and then we have a commercial or a factory area, and that's our watershed. So we are back at our watershed, and we are going to start with the agricultural area. And this is farming, of course. And by the way, what we're going to do as we go through each one of these land uses, we are going to pollute with the pollutants that we're going to talk about. For instance, on the farm, you will plow up the field, and that produces a lot of sediment. We're going to represent that sediment with a little bit of waterproof paint. And then we grow our crops, so we need fertilizer. And we also have to protect our crops, so we're going to put a little more pesticide on there. And once again, these are just ways that pollution can sometimes, when not used properly, when pesticides and things like fertilizers aren't used properly, they can harm the water. And for instance, let's put a little bit here under the tractor because our farmer's tractor is leaking, and that's quite common. Old tires might be sitting around somewhere. So we are, once again, we're polluting. This is the only time we'll get to pollute and get away with it. And the last other piece of pollution is animal pollution. Which gets in the streams. Sometimes even the cows will get in the stream. So that is our farm. The next area is our recreation area. And oddly enough, there's lots of ways to pollute your recreation area. And of course, the main one is with litter. So I'm polluting here. And also, if you've got a boat, sometimes that will leak oil. Oftentimes you'll have fertilizer on certain areas of your recreation area, especially if it's a golf course. And you'll have grass clippings, and once again, you'll have litter. So that's part of the pollution. Our next area is our roads and our bridges. Now, a lot of pollution comes from our cars. Metals, like brake metals and things like that. Think of all the millions of cars on the road, and every time somebody steps on their brakes, just a little bit of metal comes off, sparks off of those brakes. And also you have oil and other car fluids, antifreeze, things like that. So all that pollutes our roads. And then, of course, don't forget, during the winter time, a lot of times we will put salt on our roads. And of course, that salt, once it melts with the water, it goes directly into our water source. So our next area is a storm drain. And we talked about this earlier. Storm drains were created to keep our properties, for the most part, from flooding. But storm drains lead directly into the nearest creek or stream, and then they empty out into our water source. So you've got a storm drain there. Our next area is our residential area. And lots of pollution over here as well. You've got your cars leaking oil, fertilizers, things like that. And then, of course, there's the ever popular animals. We love our animals, but if we don't pick up after them, their waste just sits on top of the ground, and then when it rains, it carries that pollution into the storm drain. And the next area is a logging area. And logging area is kind of sensitive. Of course, we need wood, we need to cut down trees, but we hope everybody does it responsibly. So once you cut down those trees, you're going to lose a lot of your buffering, like your trees, your plants, bushes, things like that. And that pollution is actually, we call it sediment, and it rolls directly into the stream because once you cut your trees down, there's nothing left to keep that water from flowing when it rains, especially if it rains pretty heavy. And of course, there's always litter everywhere. And then there's car fluids, or truck fluids, I should say. A lot of times the trucks leak oil and antifreeze and things like that. And then, once again, erosion, which is that sediment that comes down. And the last one that we have, the last area of land use, is our factory. And this is where point source pollution comes into play. Now, there are all sorts of pollution on a factory area, and a lot of times it's where cars are. Once again, car fluids, car metals, things like that. Litter, lots of litter. And then there is something called thermal pollution. That's when like for instance, the parking lot gets so hot that when it rains very heavily and the water comes across the parking lot, it picks up that heat and then it flows down into your stream or creek, and then once again that goes directly into your water source, and all that heat kind of robs the animals in the water of their oxygen, because the higher the temperature and the hotter it is, the less oxygen you have in your water. And the last thing that I'm going to show is right here. These are water pollution from byproducts from a factory. And once again, there's a reason why these factories produce what they call point source pollution, and we'll see that in a minute. So we have done some serious polluting, and right now we are going to make it rain. It's going to rain really hard. I'm using a spray bottle here. It's going to rain really hard all across our watershed. And as you can see, as it rains, all those pollutants will roll down with the water in the land, roll over bushes, things like that, and they will roll directly, that water goes directly into, in our case, it's our water source, which is the Chattahoochee River. And we don't want to forget all the pollution that we sometimes get from farming. We have to eat, but I think more farmers are looking at best practices when they raise their crops now, using different fertilizers, different pesticides, so that they can keep the water clean. And once again, we're talking about the farm, so we've got some animal waste, and that goes into our water source. My little horse fell over. So I'm going to make it rain really heavily, say for instance over here in the residential section. And once again in the farming area and on the roads. And as you can see, all of that water is rolling down into our water source. And once again, don't forget that much of that water rolls through our storm water drains. So I'm going to put a little water here, and you can see it come out right here. There it is. That's pollution. All right, so we have really polluted our environment. So let's kind of analyze what we've got going on here. Remember, we talked about earlier, we talked about non-point source pollution and source point pollution. Well, point source pollution is exactly what this is right here in this factory. As you can see, the byproduct from making whatever products they made have been emptied out into the nearest water source. And that happens to be, the pollution happens to be represented by orange paint. So that's probably only one of the things that you can find here that is point source pollution. You can actually point to who created that pollution. Now, take a look down here in our water source, which is the Chattahoochee River. It's all brown, and you can hardly distinguish any. There's a little, you can see a little orange, but it has turned into brown. That is an indication, basically, of non-point source pollution. You know it's polluted, but say, for instance, you didn't pick up your dog waste up here, Fido's dog waste. Could you knock on that door and say, hey, I noticed that you didn't pick up Fido's waste. We did a monitor here and we found E. coli, and we know it's from Fido. You really don't know what dog it's from. You really don't know what car it's from. You don't know which logging area it comes from. You don't know which street it comes from. You don't know what car, once again, what car it comes from. That's non-point source pollution, and that's the hardest pollution to keep track of and to keep control of. Now that we've spent a little time polluting our watershed really, really well, let's spend a little time talking about how we can limit the effects of non-point source pollution on our environment. Let's start with the farm first. The farmer could employ best practices when he's rotating his crops and things. He would want to also limit the amount of pesticides and herbicides, and possibly even fertilizer. He might want to put up a fence here. He or she might want to put up a fence here to keep the animals out of the water. And he might want to, he or she, once again, might want to collect the animal waste and use it as compost. So there's many things that they can do in the farming area. And then you can come over here to our recreation area and of course take care of the boats, make sure that they're not leaking, make sure no trash has been thrown out, things like that. Then we can get to the roads, and there's a lot we can do on the roads. We can stop littering. Litter is a huge problem on our roads and our streets, and it's the one thing that we can probably start to do immediately to alleviate water pollution. Just don't throw anything out of the car. Don't throw anything out of your purse. Just keep the litter off the ground. And then, of course, on the road, you can keep your keep the oils and fluids from the road, things like that. Take care of your brakes. Just take care of your car. Then you have residential right here. And of course, you can always pick up after your dog. You would not believe how much waste, animal waste gets into our water source because people don't pick up after their dogs. And that, once again, is an easy thing to do. We all love our pets. We're not crazy about picking up after them, but it's such a simple thing to do. Just pick it up and throw it in the garbage. And then, of course, take care of our cars again. Make sure we don't put things down the toilet that shouldn't be there so that the wastewater pipes don't back up and the sewage doesn't get in the street and go down the drains, the stormwater drains, because once again, those stormwater drains lead directly to the nearest water source, and that nearest water source, like a creek or a stream, leads directly to, in our area, the Chattahoochee. And then we have logging. Once again, keeping the car clean, keeping the car, or keeping the trucks from leaking, and putting silt fencing up here to keep the silt and the debris from getting into the water source. So there's lots that we can do about non-point source pollution. So lastly, I wanted to remind you that the Chattahoochee River and the Flint come together and they run into the Apalachicola Bay, and then they empty out into the Gulf of Mexico. And then possibly that water often goes into the Atlantic Ocean. So anything you're doing upstream certainly is going to affect downstream and way over in the Atlantic Ocean. So it's quite possible, for instance, if you found some pollution from, say, the Atlanta area, you could actually have it end up in the Gulf of Mexico. It could travel all the way down from the Atlanta area, or it could travel from the headwaters of the Chattahoochee up in the Blue Ridge Mountains even. So once again, debris travels, pollution always travels through the waters and across your watershed. Now this last picture, I don't want you to be afraid of it. The person who took it, the photographer who took it, cut it away from the little turtle. Now that little turtle had a bottle wrapper, those plastic 6-pack wrappers, wrapped around him for quite a while. You can see his little body shape had to grow according to how tight that little plastic piece was around him. But the photographer once again cut it off of him, and he's fine now. But there's a good chance that that particular piece of trash came from, once again, the Atlanta area and ended up in the Gulf area because they found that little turtle in the Gulf area. And lastly, just remember there's always somebody living above you or below you. So if we're in the middle in Atlanta, we're hoping the people above us keep their waters clean when it comes to us, and the people below us are hoping that we keep our water clean when it flows to them. So we're not in this alone, and everybody can have an equal part in keeping our water resources clean. So I'm Shelley Lang with the Fulton County Department of Public Works, and thank you for spending your time with me today to talk about non-point source pollution and how to keep it under control. I hope you and your family are healthy and well.